The uplands of Wales make up more than a third of our landmass. They are wild places where people have lived and farmed for generations. Much of these uplands consist of blanket peat bog, but across Wales, just under a half of this important habitat remains intact. Man has played a significant part in its degradation.
And on bogs in particular, in the decades following the Second World War, there was quite a big drive to try and drain these. It obviously did a great deal of harm to the bog surfaces.
But now, with funding from the Welsh Government's Resilient Ecosystem Fund, a partnership has been formed between RSPB Cymru, the National Trust, Dŵr Cymru Welsh Water, Natural Resources Wales, and with Snowdonia National Park as its lead partner, whose aim is to restore some areas of this important habitat to its former glory.
Blocking up the drainage ditches is a highly cost-effective means of improving the biodiversity of these wonderful ecosystems.
Peatlands are enormously important for us in this country. We depend on them for clean, pure drinking water. We probably don't realise the amount of carbon that's locked in these moorlands, and an actively growing moorland such as this will be locking down thousands of tonnes of carbon a year, equivalent to thousands of cars off the road. Alternatively, if we were to let these peatlands dry out, there would be millions of tonnes of carbon put back into the atmosphere, and we all know that would not be good news.
And a peatland in good condition is more likely to be able to hang on to its water and to smooth out the way that water runs off the watercourses and reservoirs. And that is an important part of in the range of measures we can use to help reduce flooding in lowland valleys.
The restoration work is focused upon 4 main sites: Mynydd Hiraethog and the Mignite in Gwynedd, and the Berwyn Mountains and Arthog Bog near Dolgellau. Work will also take place on other smaller bogs within the Snowdonia National Park.
The work involved with restoring the blanket bogs is fairly straightforward. Basically means refilling the ditches that were previously opened, infilling them with spoil, either filling them the whole length of the ditch or by producing dams every 10 metres or so. Otherwise, it involves some of the site removing vegetation which has encroached onto the site that we don't want to see there, things such as Sitka spruce and Rhododendron ponticum.
The restoration and protection of this ancient landscape will benefit us all, not only now, but also future generations.
We're standing on a magnificent little bog on Mynydd Hiraethog, on just at the head of the Alwyn Reservoir. The range of plants that can form peat is wide and varied, and really any of the plants that we see around us on these bog surface are likely to be represented, preserved in the peat. But a very important group of plants are the so-called bog mosses, the sphagnum mosses. This is a very specialised group of species, only around 26 or so species in the United Kingdom. You'll see just how much water these mosses can hold. An extraordinary amount of water coming out of that sphagnum as I squeeze it. This is literally the lifeblood of the bog, this water. And it is sometimes referred to as a kind of ecosystem engineer bog moss, because it's kind of one of the species that actually enables the bog to develop in the first place. Now, peat accumulates at the rate of around about 1 millimetre per year as a very rough estimate. And this sample chamber is 1/2 metre long, so it's possible we're looking at around about 500 years worth of peat accumulation. And if the total peat thickness on this bog is of the order of 4 or 5 metres, which it could well be, then we could be looking at something that's been forming over 4 or 5 or even longer 6,000 year timescales.
Although peat bog only makes up between 3 and 5% of Wales's surface, it contains 30% of its carbon. However, as well as storing carbon, there are other benefits to a healthy, functioning peat bog.
The other vitally important aspect of peatlands in good condition is that they should hopefully be actually actively accumulating carbon from the atmosphere, as carbon dioxide is trapped in the remains of the plants which aren't decomposing as much as they would in a dry land ecosystem. And estimates vary as to how much carbon these systems accumulate, but it can be of the order of 15 grams per square metre per year, which doesn't sound a great deal, but when you kind of integrate that across the wider expanse of peatland in Wales, so say 50, 60,000 hectares of bog habitat, then that becomes a big number, and that's an important part of the set of measures we can use to try and mitigate climate change.
Although intact and functioning peat bogs are important in combating climate change, damaged and dried out peat bogs can actually contribute to climate change and global warming.
What happens when you put a drain through a peatland is that the water table will, within the body of the peat next to the drain, will drop down to the level of that drain, and that will result in a certain amount of peat above the water table getting dry and oxidising and then actually decomposing, and that releases carbon dioxide to the atmosphere.
Stopping this carbon dioxide from being released and returning the bog to a healthy condition is relatively straightforward.
The cost of restoring peatlands varies according to the type of peatland, and with these rain-fed blanket bogs, blocking up the drainage ditches across is extremely cost effective. An experienced operator can put in a peat dam within quite a short period of time, and you can quite quickly re-wet up a hectare of blanket bog.
As well as carbon, another important resource is dependent upon a functioning, healthy peat bog.
Blanket bog is basically a massive sponge. So not only does it act as a storage of water, it's also acting as a natural filter. So it's actually filtering that water and making it clean as it passes into the reservoir. So the health of that bog is really important. When the bog is degraded, it can hold less water. What also happens when you get heavy rainfall events, you get a lot of the peat washing into the stream. So with it, it's bringing colour and dissolved organic carbon into the reservoir.
That dissolved organic carbon has implications in terms of cost for water companies' customers.
This is one of the main streams that feeds into the reservoir, passes through the peat bog, and as you can see from this bottle of water that we've just taken from the stream, it's very highly coloured. Obviously, when it gets to the treatment process, we need to treat this water so that it is like this when we supply it to our customers. So the cleaner the water coming from the peat bog, so the less colour that it has in the water, the better for us, because it requires less chemicals and energy to treat it, and the cheaper then the cost to our customers.
Functioning peatland is not only a store for carbon and water, but is also habitat for wildlife like the hen harrier, skylark, curlew and the golden plover. However, the degradation of the peatland habitat has seen dramatic declines in their populations. One upland area in mid-Wales has undergone restoration and is already on the way to restoring these peatland habitats to their pristine condition.
We're on the RSPB Lake Vermey Reserve in North Montgomeryshire, and between 2006 and 2010 we undertook a very large EU life-funded project to block a lot of the moorland drains that had been put in on the moorland between the 1940s and 50s. This is a drain in front of me here. These pools of water built up behind the dams, and it started to fill in with this sphagnum moss, and the water is now spreading out across the moor. It does look different. I can tell just walking over it that it is wetter than it used to be. It's very invertebrate rich. There's a lot of invertebrates in this, so we've got a lot of insects. The wetter peat actually holds more things, leather jackets, daddy longlegs larvae, and that's a great food source for a lot of our insect-eating birds. Curlew, meadow pipits, skylarks, golden plover. I think probably meadow pipits and skylarks have shown an increase.
The hope is that the current project will also see the improvements in habitat and wildlife that have already been seen at Fernwy. However, the Berwyns, Mignite, Arthog and Hiraethog are not only areas where wildlife can thrive, they are also living landscapes where people have settled and made a living for hundreds, if not thousands of years. Now evidence is building that peatland restoration is beneficial to communities and farming in a number of ways. One is that closing the drains may mean that farmers lose fewer sheep who are known to fall into these drains and die.
Mae'n anodd efo'r tystiolaeth ar hyn o bryd gan bod 'na lai o ddefaid wedi cael agwyn wedi cael ei troi fyny i'r mynydd llynedd achos llynedd oedd y maen prawf gyntaf efo cae a phosydd, ond achos mi oedd yna golledion mawr yn byd amaeth yn yr iadell Gymraeg drwy'r eira llynedd ym mis Ebrill ac yna lai o ddefaid wedi cael ei gyrru fyny i'r mynydd. Ond yn sicr o'r dystiolaeth wrth gau y phosydd a buodd y contractwyr yn dod ar draws yn y phosydd, roedd nifer fawr o gyrff defaid a gwyn yn y phosydd. Felly, mae sefyll reswm, swn i feddwl, tybio fydd yna lai o golledion o achos bod y phosydd i cau.
As well as possibly reducing the number of sheep losses, there is increasing evidence that peatland restoration, and specifically filling in the drains, is also beneficial in reducing the risk of flooding.
Mae yna bobl yn gweld mantais mowr. Mae'r afon ei hun i weld yn glir, mae'r dŵr yn yr afon yn ei weld yn iachach na beidio, ond mae'n weld yn fwy clir. Mae'r ffermwyr yn byw sydd yn ffarmio a tir sydd yn dod lawr at yr afon. Maen nhw'n gweld bendith ar un o bryd achos yn ystod y blynyddoedd y gia maen nhw'n arfer cael galwad a ffôn gyn yr asiantaeth yr amgylchedd yn dweud bod yr afon ar godi rhybudd coch ac maen nhw'n cael o symud i defaid. Ond leni maen nhw wedi cael sawl rhybudd coch a dydy'r afon ddim wedi gorlifo dros i tir sydd yn arbed lot iddyn nhw ag posibilrwydd o llai golledion o golli i'w defaid.
Some farmers are not convinced that closing the drains will reduce sheep losses. However, many of them as custodians of the land are supportive of the restoration for wider environmental reasons. Glyn Roberts farms part of the Mignite in the project area.
Ar hyn o bryd, dwi yn niwtral ar y peth. Am reswm, dwi'n wedi cael argyhoeddi bod nhw'n beth da. Ond dwi yn cydnabod o bosib bod eu blocio nhw yn cyfrannu at liniaru rhywfaint ar cynnesu byd eang ac os di hynny drwy cyfuno a chloi y carbon i mewn os dwi'n teimlo bod gynna ni fel diwydiant oblygiad neu bob beth fedrwn ni i liniaru cynnesu byd eang ac yng nghyd-destun hynny mae o'n beth da.